Hello everyone, this is the panel session to talk about end-to-end seamless travel for a new world. For sure, 2020 has been a challenging year for travel. There can be no doubt that biometrics will play a crucial role in getting the world moving again post-COVID-19. Everything we do has been disrupted by COVID-19 and paradigms are changing everywhere. Just this week, I heard Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam saying their seamless travel program has morphed into a touchless travel program. This panel will discuss the rapid technological advances for intelligent use of biometrics at the border, as well as the continued evolution of passenger experience to curb to gate and even reservation to destination. I'm Terry Hartman, and I lead the business for Cognitech face recognition in the Asia Pacific region. I vowed to stop shaving until I got a vaccine, and I started on the 1st of March. So those of you who know me can attest to that fact. So joining with me on the panel, I have Sung from the US Customs and Border Protection Office, and he's the Acting Director in the Sea Innovation, Mobility and Biometric Advancement within the Office of Field Operations. He leads the development and integration of facial biometric technology into entry and inspection operations to transform the arrival process at air and seaports of entry. Welcome, Sung.
Thank you very much.
Don Jordan is the Director, the Future Traveller in the Australian Border Force. He's an active participant of the ICAO International Civil Aviation Organisations and IATA International Aviation Transport Association working groups, including digital travel credentials and One ID. Don has a passion for exploring how industry and government can work together to deliver secure and streamlined travel. Welcome, Don.
Thanks, Terry.
Mohammed Murad is the VP of Sales and Business Development for Iris ID Systems, a company that specialises in iris recognition technology products. He's a highly accomplished international business, strategic solution designer, and technical leader within global identity management industries. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you.
So first up, to set some scene for this discussion, I'm going to ask each of the panelists, what is the biggest single issue that COVID-19 has initiated with respect to how your organisation now views end-to-end seamless travel? Sung.
Thank you, Don. And thank you for this opportunity. As you guys know, COVID-19, our air and cruise partners have been hit hard by the record-breaking losses and as a result of the reduced travel globally. To resume operation and encourage recovery of the travel industry, our partners must implement processes that minimize contact, such as long lines, queuing, and exchanging papers, while encouraging touchless process. As a result, there's a greater need for technology such as facial recognition, touchless biometrics, and CBP offers our partners with a solution that can address this need. And I'm sure, I don't know if you guys have opportunity to enjoy our process at the airport or the cruise lines, but the biometric that we are currently utilizing will be definitely assisting the new travel orders after this COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Obviously, the big factor for us is that we've got relatively closed borders at the moment. We've got quite heavy restrictions on travel to and from Australia. So we've been trying to discuss what does seamless travel mean going forward? How do we, I guess, reopen our borders in a safe and secure way? So for us, it's the biometrics piece is critical in terms of anchoring identity and understanding who's coming, who's leaving. But having that more holistic look of traveller data, understanding contact tracing information, having that connection with travellers earlier in the pathway. So a lot of traditional border processes of, we've got interactive advanced passenger information and the like, but most of our processes happen at border. It's how do we extend the border out and start that interaction in more detail with passengers so we can get the data we need to help make the risk-based decisions we need to safely reopen borders.
So in fact, in Australia, the downturn in travel at the present time is something like 98% from what it was a year ago. And so is this giving you some luxury to sort out new processes going forward, or is it a problem that you don't have enough travellers to test things effectively with?
Testing's definitely a big problem at the moment, so being able to work with travellers. Also just working through exemption process. How the borders will open up again is a big factor for us and taking up a lot of time in the organisation.
Okay, Mohammed.
Well, we have two colleagues from the service side that they control the border and manage the border. From our side, from a technology perspective, it has, we always have promoted non-contact solutions for identity authentication. And this COVID-19 has really initiated that into a faster mode. So we have customers, and including CBP, some parts of CBP, that are discussing how we can take iris recognition and facial recognition and combine that into a travel program where we can identify people from at the time where they're checking in at the travel desk all the way to the gate without touching extraordinarily that they will be, instead of touching a gate, etc. So we think that as technology partner, we can help our customers implement some of those solutions in the process of identifying passengers.
So, Mohammed, why would biometrics play a crucial role potentially in getting the world moving again post-COVID? Maybe we argue that why have biometrics at all? Because we don't have pressure on airports and travel anymore, so we can just go back to what we used to do.
Well, I mean, I do not believe we're going to go back to actually, we're going to go back to the normal level of travel that we had about a year ago or a year and a half ago. Like you mentioned that in Australia, you have 98% down. It's not going to remain that way. It will grow. And when it grows, you need to continue those efficiencies so you can process those individuals or passengers quickly. So you need some extra technologies, and biometric is going to play an integral part of making sure the passengers, the right passengers are going in the right place and you're boarding them onto a right plane or a ship, etc.
And Don, what are your thoughts?
I think biometrics are going to be crucial for us, and I think the work that's been done by ICAO through digital travel credentials and IATA from what I do is just further validated by this, moving it to work earlier, having that better interaction with travellers, being able to anchor identity to the information we're receiving is going to be really critical. I know our organisation is looking very strongly at biometrics and how we use them and where we collect, how we work more closely with the industry to reduce those touch points and to help, I guess, move the risk assessment as early as possible in the pathway to make things smoother for when people actually do get to the airport, so that can be a more seamless journey. So it's really looking towards a data-driven model rather than a touch point check sort of process-driven model that we have today.
What biometrics are on your radar in that context, Don?
Facial biometrics are the main driver for us at the moment.
Okay, Sung?
No, and as you guys know, CBP, we are currently leveraging the biometric facial recognition. It is obviously with this COVID now, it will not only safety of the health and of our officers and travelers, but this is more seamless and it's much more friendlier versus come up and then give us your fingerprints. So when I work on this in this cruise environment, facial biometrics, all these family, they get to enjoy the process with the entire family versus, when you go to airport, when you're coming back to United States, non-US citizens they have to give up the fingerprints. Versus, if we have your good fingerprint and then your face is matching, it's much more seamless that we don't have to do the repetitive process. So leveraging biometric will be crucial and critical to the industry for both, for travelers and of course, the safety of our officers as well, too.
So, Sung, the US relies heavily on fingerprint capture and kiosks. Do you see that you'll need to in any way change the contact aspects of that?
So I'm assuming you're referring to those automated passport control kiosks at the certain airports. I don't know if you recently traveled.
Entry to the US, actually, I was referring
right.
to.
Obviously, there are a lot of travel restrictions now, but there are certain airports that we we implement the facial biometrics. Those automated passport control kiosks are slowly fading away. We are actually going with our biometric that, when travelers arrive to the United States, instead of go to those kiosks, they actually come to our officers, and we'll begin their inspection by capturing their photo, and the matching response is less than 2 seconds. We are receiving a very, very high percentage of matching, and with that success, not only the travelers get the seamless process, but at the border safety wise, we are actually capturing those imposters who try to come in as somebody else's. So the facial biometric gives us both the benefit to the travelers for the seamless, but at the same time, it's giving us benefit for securing borders.
And what about global entry, which is really a frequent traveler program for CBP entry that relies on fingerprint verification? What's happening with that?
So thanks. I was going to mention global entry too, but we are actually slowly replacing the process. Instead of to begin the global entry process, obviously you scan the passport, then you go through the series, including fingerprint. With the new way of a global entry now is when you come to the kiosk, we're going to capture your photo, and if you match and if you have a good fingerprints, you are pretty much done at that point. Obviously, you have to answer the customs declaration questions. But we are slowly replacing that process with a facial biometric.
Okay. So how, in terms of the challenges around the airport and the end-to-end travel process, does thoughts and questions about how do I introduce some kind of I am COVID-free verification process for travelers when they arrive or at the time of departure or whatever, how do we add an I am COVID-free surety to our processes? Do we need to? Do we have pressure to? Don?
I think, that's an interesting question. One that we asked quite a bit. I mean, historically, there's been processes in place around yellow fever certificates. So there are historical precedent for how these things are being managed. I'm sure once we do get to a point there's a vaccine, that governments will be interested in seeing evidence of that, whether that's digital through digital wallet type applications or physical stamp documents, or I guess will wait to be seen. But that's where the UN bodies and that will be particularly, and ICAO will be particularly relevant in coming up with standards that are applicable across the world, rather than each jurisdiction trying to come up with their own.
Has this started to be talked about in IATA or ICAO working groups yet?
I'll probably have to go back to check on that, but I believe there's papers being presented by ICAO looking at the end-to-end process, and these are things that will be considered in those processes.
Okay, Mohammed, what are you seeing in this area?
Well, I think there will be some sort of a process for verifying the person has a vaccine or not. So in travel industry is probably going to adopt the same what other industries are going to do. So, for example, we are currently in discussions with NIH to see if there is a way to have some sort of a digital identity token or something created for individuals who get vaccines. So they have access into buildings or can get into the airport, etc. So I believe there needs to be some sort of a verification process that this individual is vaccinated. So, the airports and the airlines, along with other passengers, are comfortable there is not going to be any outbreaks coming out of their travel.
And NIH is?
NIH, because of the vaccine and there is a there's an organization created, the Warp Speed, Office of the Warp Speed, that is responsible for distribution of the vaccine and managing all the whole process of the vaccine. They are interested in to see how they can issue some sort of a digital token or an ID for people who have received vaccine. I mean, they have talked about, there have been ideas tossed around that even at restaurants and stores and other places that they will keep these readers so you can read the token that you have been vaccinated.
Right, and that's National Institute of Health?
Yeah, that's National Institute of Health.
US people, yeah.
Correct.
Are you seeing anything outside in other countries, Mohammed, besides the US?
Yeah, so the other countries, for example, in Korea, they already have a contact tracing, which they're talking about to be to make it part of a vaccine process. So the contact tracing is through the phone and the QR code. So when you walk into a building or a facility, you use your phone to read that QR code, so they know you were there. So in case there was somebody in that vicinity was tested positive, they can trace it back. There's some discussions going on how we can overlay the process of vaccinated people into that QR code.
And Sung, is I am COVID free keeping you up at night?
Yes, obviously that is very important. And then CBP, we are continuing to support our various partners, including CDC, Center for Disease Control, airports and airlines on their roles and responsibilities to ensure the passenger safety. Obviously, we're the border screening agency, so the close tie with those partners would be crucial to our success of the COVID-free passenger to come in and out to the United States.
And do you see anything different about how airports and seaports versus seaports will handle this?
I mean, the airport and seaport, they're both into they're travel industry. They're both doing their best to continue the travel, right? Obviously, airs, you do see the limited travel, but the cruise lines, unfortunately, they're suspended due to the CDC's no-sail orders. However, I recently saw the article that both Royal Caribbean and Norwegian Cruise Line commit a partnership to submit the health document to CDC with the bring all these experts about this health industry. And then I'm hoping that with that document was potentially suffice the CDC's no-sail orders. Obviously, it got extended to one more month, October 31st. But we are watching very closely to see that no-sail order get lifted. But both industries are do their due diligence to ensure the passenger safety, also the government, our officers' safety, so that we are COVID-free for both parties.
Okay, so thinking to what we thought we'd be doing at the start of the year and where you thought things would be at the end of 2020 versus what you're doing and dealing with today from a seamless travel perspective, what would you say has slowed down in priority that would not have otherwise slowed down, and what areas are accelerating in terms of what the focus is? Son?
So for us, obviously, we were already utilizing the facial biometrics, but now with the COVID, there's increased demand for touchless biometric through though it's facial comparison technology. CBP encourages safe and seamless travel that reduce the reliance on exchanging documents such as boarding passes, even passports, by offering other methods such as the traveler's face to verify travelers' identities. Both airports and cruise lines, but we would like them to adopt this new process that minimize contact, long lines, and exchange of documents as much as possible.
Don?
Yeah, it's a good question, and in some ways, I think there's an acceleration. It's just obviously with different accent points that we're trying to hit, and I think where there's been a large focus on biometrics and collecting that identity data to help with seamless processes, what we're now looking at is a more holistic view of the data collected. So where we've relied on paper passenger cards or declarations at border or information provided later in the process, is looking at how much of that we can move earlier and earlier, so that I guess we've got the information we need and we can understand what travellers are doing before they step on a plane, because I think the last thing we want is long queues when people get to the airport having to satisfy all the requirements that government have and that the community would expect us to be doing to make sure that there's safe and streamlined processes in place. So it's really brought to a focus the need to move things earlier, to collect a broader range of data and anchor it in identity, so that we've got a level of assurance about the data being received. As you noted earlier, it's making testing and trialling particularly difficult. So we've got to come up with a few different ways of doing that, and that's even with existing projects that we're in train and looking to roll out technologies. But I think it's trying to understand what the vendors are bringing to the table as well is an interesting challenge for government, because obviously sometimes you see things that you've seen for the last couple of years rebadged, and sometimes you see things completely new popping out of the woodwork. So it's trying to understand what's really available out there and what's possible to achieve in some very short time frames.
So we've heard from Sung and Don about face increasing in priority in their organisations. What are you seeing with Iris, Mohammed? Are you seeing standard BAU as in 2019, or are you seeing changes in how organisations around the world are looking at Iris?
Well, since the COVID-19, we have seen a huge tick in contact with Iris ID to learn more about iris recognition. I mean, we were seeing a progress in adoption anyway, but since that time, the people are more interested to know what other contactless technologies that they can adopt in their solutions. So Iris can play a very important role in the travel industry. As the more people will be wearing masks, so the identity through face could be a challenge. And I know your company and our company are working together to figure some things out about the mask. So that's why in the early part of the year we launched this R&D effort to be able to fuse the face and the iris and come up with more accurate and more efficient and quick way for people to be able to identify. So we have new products in play now that we are starting to prototype and demo with some customers to be able to take a face and iris at the same time. Whichever biometric modality hit first, that's what's going to send to match or fuse them together to be able to give you a better result.
So with face, a lot of people are now going to be wearing face masks on the plane, as they get off the plane, as they arrive at the border. What are your policies going to be, or are they now, around handling face versus how religious wear may have been handled in the past? And what happens at secondary in terms of verification of identity and handling that? If you have an exception or you can't be sure that person is who they say they are versus their passport. Sung?
So when it comes to face, obviously CBP, we do respect the people's religious purpose, right? So when those for religious purpose, we do try to honor it, and we do our best to adhere their rules and regulation. When it comes to mask, obviously when we are talking with the industry, their goal is to, the taking off mask and take the photo is relatively quick. It takes less than a second. That ensures that we are looking at the right individual, because obviously, it is a border security. So we hope that people can understand. And if they don't want to take the mask, obviously we do have a supplemental verification of fingerprints. So we have many options to verify to ensure that we are admitting the right individual to the United States.
Okay, Don?
Yeah, our teams work very closely with the Department of Health to make sure that they're operating in a safe manner. Our staff are all using PPE when they're dealing with flights coming in. So I think it's more a ground discussion in how they deal with things and manage those risks. But we still need to undertake that core identity piece at the border, and the officers will manage that as they need to.
So fingerprints CBP has relied heavily on. Do you think that we'll see that fingerprints, I could say, fingerprints dead at the border now because we're moving to face and we don't want to touch things, and the logistics of cleaning fingerprint readers in between every person is difficult? What's happening with fingerprint?
So for fingerprint, I mean, as you know, the foundation of law enforcement is built upon fingerprint database. It is also obviously, when you get arrested, obviously they will take the mugshot, but they'll take your fingerprint, and they have a great database on it. Even though face is that's our prime modality right now, some people actually may potentially fake it by do the plastic surgery or try to mimic, like i.e. twins, right? You could somehow trick the system, but you cannot copy one's fingerprint. So for CBP, I think fingerprints still be utilized as our supplemental database. Also, if God forbid, if system somehow face system goes down, we also have a fingerprint as our supplement database to ensure the verification of the one's correct identities.
And how do you handle the sanitization aspects of touch between passengers?
So right now our officers wears the mask and they wear gloves, and also we do have cleaning solutions so that every time if you are needed a fingerprint, they will take their fingerprint, but we do have a cleaning solution and the necessary cleaning equipment to ensure the cleanness and the obviously the health of a passenger, so that when next person comes in, they'll be feel much better, and because obviously they're going to see that process and they're going to see our officers do their due diligence to clean all these equipments.
And does that happen for kiosks as well?
APC kiosk is typically those are run by the airports, so I am pretty confident that the airport authority who runs those kiosks will do their due diligence for the cleaning and the necessary prep.
Okay, Don?
Yeah, as you know, in Australia, fingerprints are secondary biometric that we use for secondary verification law enforcement purposes. So it's sparingly used. We're manually processing travellers at the moment as well. So very conscious of those issues around cleaning equipment and making sure those things are managed in line with Department of Health guidelines for us.
Okay, Mohammed, fingerprints
Well,
dead?
I don't believe fingerprint is dead. You have a very, very large databases out there for criminal records, etc. Every biometric will continue to play an integral role in identity authentication. We feel that specifically in the travel industry or travel programs, touchless biometrics are going to take the lead. As Song mentioned, that about the facial recognition, there could be issues. So that's why we believe the iris recognition and facial recognition will be partnering technologies for deployment at the border.
So a lot of iris capture devices are binocular style, require you to put a device against your forehead to capture. Do you see those being phased out in terms of touchless iris capture devices?
Correct. Well, they've been in the travel programs. They've been phased out for a very, very long time. We have made efforts in our R&D to be able to capture a face and iris of an individual from a distance of about a meter. So some of our recent devices So you mentioned as Schiphol Airport recently said that they're going touchless. So their premium program have been using Iris for almost 17, 18 years. And in their new Iris devices that we are providing now, they capture distances about a meter. And they take a full frontal face and Iris at the same time. So I don't believe that customer will see any of those binocular devices or any of those devices they put on their face at the airports or any of the border crossing. Those devices will remain in play for areas that they're challenging and that they're outside and maybe military theaters, but you will not see them in the border application.
Okay. Do you think, Sung, there's curb check-in in the US? Has COVID-19 challenges had any effect on that?
So obviously, COVID-19 has created even greater need to adopt a new process that minimize contact and the touch point at every part of the travel continuum. At the same time, CBP must continue to facilitate legitimate travel while also maintaining national security. Face biometrics and other touchless technology enable both missions. And obviously, CBP is committed to advance the way people travel by leveraging biometrics, such as check-in counter to boarding flight, TSA, and the backdrops. So our biometric, as you know, we are leveraging with our airline partners and our cruise line partner to ensure the seamless travel for the and obviously seamless travel and their health concern during their travel.
Okay, Don.
Yeah, in terms of curb to gate, I mean, we have departure smart gates in operation, so automated border control using facial biometrics. So that model works reasonably well in that sense. We have the cleaning in place and whatnot. I think we're looking at how, over the coming years, how we work more closely with industry at leveraging concepts such as One ID, and if industry is going to be collecting biometrics through their different touch points, how we can reuse those rather than having duplicative processes in place. So it's helping us think about how we can work more closely with the industry, how we can reduce touch points, exactly what is needed to get someone into and out of the country, and making sure that we've got as seamless a process as possible with the data being collected at the most appropriate point. So it is a bit of a challenge in terms of how we start to work more closely with industry and start to break down some of those silos and look towards a new model.
So Australia's been testing moving from two-phase EGates, where you get a ticket and answer questions on a touchscreen and then subsequently go and pass the border, to single-step EGates. Has COVID had any effect on the approach to that, Don?
Not at this stage. Obviously, just the usual health and safety aspects are being taken into consideration, how that'll look. The longer term planning, we're starting to look at how do we capture that data that's collected at kiosks and gates ahead of travel, so we can remove steps in the process and start to conduct those checks a lot earlier, and use that time while someone's in the air to actually make some decisions, and rather than people and officers have to deal with the queues in front of them and dealing with what can be complex decisions when algorithms say one thing and the officer says another, and how they can manage those with more time rather than having to deal with them at border necessarily.
So, Mohammed, if we think about pulling back the first touch points for travellers to making a reservation, for example, you can capture photos with webcams and the like for passengers and start to link that biometric with their biographic identity that they're putting forward at that point in time. Not so easy to do that with Iris. Where does Iris dovetail into that process?
Well, I think Iris is going to be in the process when you are at the airport. So yes, there are discussions going on, and there are some applications out there where you can take a picture on the phone, and then that becomes part of your identity authentication getting a boarding pass, etc. We feel Iris is going to play a role inside the building. So when you show up, you're asking for your boarding pass, a paper boarding pass, or you're checking in. At that point, you will be using the Iris identification or enrollment process, or walking up to the gate. We have some customers where we're discussing about having a boarding pass free boarding process where you're doing the whole thing with the biometric. All these things are in discussions are in the early stages, but airline industry and airports, they are thinking about how can we make these efforts efficiently by including iris recognition and facial recognition together.
So we're seeing, since COVID started, we've seen our inboxes spammed with temperature sensing devices linked up to facial capture devices, linked up to dispersing sanitary sterilizers and the like. Where does temperature fit into, and temperature checking fit into the airport context and environment? Is it a new thing to worry about? Is it irrelevant? Are these kinds of multimodal suggestions, is it too soon to be thinking about how those get deployed? What's happening when someone says, well, why didn't you check my temperature when I came into New York City?
So obviously, currently CBP, we follow the strict guidelines of CDC. So we are collaborating with all these our industry partners. It's a private-public partnership, right? So that when some measuring temperature, that if you check in at the airport and you're feeling that you got more than 100 degrees, then that's a collaboration that we need to work with the partner to ensure that we are, we are just make sure that we're looking at the right individual to leave and in and out from the countries.
Right. So you haven't had particular pressure to add temperature checking to your processes?
So we are not yet, as far as my understanding concerned, that's something that we are looking into it. Obviously, that's something we are very working closely with CDC on that part.
Okay, I just point out to everybody as we're going through these, any particular questions you have, please raise those in the chat panel that we have, so we can address some of those by chat replies. You've got a good idea and perspective of a number of points that the panel has made and a number of areas. So if there's specific questions you'd like to cover, then please feel free to include those in the chat session. So the topic of temperature checking, Don?
Yeah, that's something, that's the border agency. We take advice from the Department of Health and what they determines appropriate measures to take at the border in those for the departing passengers and for the arriving passengers. And it's also a question for each, I guess, airport and airline for their own procedures to make a decision on how they, what advice they receive and what processes they want to put in place. But at the moment, it's not something that's in effect for us. But we keep following the health advice, and we'll take that on board as it changes and updates and moves back.
So, Mohammed, are you working on an algorithm to tell from someone's iris if they have COVID?
No, but we are working on stuff that we can incorporate the temperature sensing devices into our iris cameras. So that work is very actively going on. There are some customers who are already using temperature sensors with tablets and other technology. So I believe that will be a requirement, but me personally, I think there are some health data issues with the temperature sensing and keeping that record in the United States specifically, where we have the HIPAA rules, etc., where Do we need to tell other people about the health of other individuals? So it's sort of a complicated issues. But as far as the technology implementation concerned, absolutely possible, and we're doing it with attaching a temperature sensor to our devices.
Yes, it's. I think one of the other areas, if we looked at ICAO, machine readable zones, and data stored in the chips on passports, then people could say, well, gee, there's an area on the chip in the passport that's not being used. It's available for other data. We could put health information on there. We could put visa information in there. Is that ever going to happen, Don?
I think that's a bigger question than someone like me can answer. I think you've always got to consider the downstream impacts of those things. These things can be quite good, but then there's a lot of retrofitting of equipment and things like that to make sure you can then ingest the data. So I think the data packets are definitely things we're interested in, and it's a case of, what's the best way to get those in?
I think, from what I've really seen, there's different levels of data and there's different levels of personal data. And it's one thing to say, yes, we're going to capture your name, sex, date of birth. We're going to verify the information that appears on the data page of your passport. We're going to capture your photo, which is on the data page of your passport. But things like your health status or your travel intentions or whatever, that's not necessarily an item that belongs in your identity document. Yeah. A lot of people would argue.
Correct.
Sung, do you agree with that?
No, I agree with my both counterparts here that the having data is good, but at the same time, the privacy of one's individual, those especially the health portion of it, that's something that is going to be something that very difficult to overcome when it comes to adjudicating those one's privacy. So, but having additional data is good, but with the right proximity of the data.
Okay, so let's look ahead to summer 2022, 18 months from now in the context of the Northern Hemisphere summer. What will passengers' seamless travel experience, what would you like to see that look like? And how will that compare to summer 2022 if there was no COVID? Son?
So CBP, we envision that in 22, the passengers will have seamless travel with the advancement of technology and biometrics. As I mentioned previously before, the CBP, we were already moving towards to the vision even before COVID-19. Obviously, with the COVID, travel has been changed, but don't see things returning the way it was done before. Obviously, investment made today not only address COVID-19, but also help travel industry build infrastructure that can withstand other travel challenges in the future. The two examples that I gave was obviously when you come back to enter to the United States now, certain airport, you go through our facial biometric that's much more seamless, and it's much touchless as well too, because we don't have to handle your document as frequent as previously before. For the cruise industry, if you're coming back from the cruise, you go into those cameras and they will take the photo, and obviously the photo will be sent to CBP for matching. It takes 2 seconds or less. And to process, 6,000 passengers back in the days, it took more than 5-6 hours. With the biometric deployment that we have, we are successfully processing these individuals approximately 3.5 hours or less. So I am envisioning that with the biometric, it will be much more seamless, faster, but at the same time for border security, it will be secure.
Mohammed?
Well, in summer 2022, I guess we're going to skip the 21 summer, huh? I believe there will be many new processes and technologies coming into the travel industry from the touchless perspective. I feel we will see kiosks that you don't touch, you talk to them, and the voice prompts will process you through. because everybody is not going to be able to check in on their phones if you're traveling with their family. So you will see a very, very high tech user interactive kiosks available to provide check in. Um, you will see gates that they're going to be fast, and facial recognition or iris recognition technologies implemented in those gates. You will see screening equipment that is going to be far more user friendly than it is today. So I believe it's going to go through a whole lot of change in that process. The only danger in this whole thing is because the travel industry is really have hurt by not having the revenue to invest in those technologies. So we need to see how the private and public partnerships can help bring these technologies into the airports or the seaports or other borders.
So that could point to travel being, or your experience at airports being more disjointed than it was a year ago, because different borders and different airports might have different processes and different levels of technology.
Absolutely. It depending on where they are. If they're in the Western Hemisphere and they are in a well-off area, those airports are going to be very high tech, and then you're going to end up airports where the process is very, very hectic. So that's normally anyway. But some of the high tech airports I consider Schiphol Airport and a few others. They are thinking far out there about what they can do to process those passengers quickly and efficiently.
Don?
Yeah, I think that the different technologies in the different airports will be a bit of a challenge. And I guess for us in Australia, we'd gotten to a point pre-COVID where 70% of travel movements were through automated border processing using face. We're getting to a point where we've taken that about as far as we could go. We're into the marginal gains rather than the big transformative steps with that. So for us, it's how do we move to a biometric border? How do we get ourselves being able to collect that data early enough to give us time to actually make some good decisions on it, so that when people do arrive at our airports, we can have a lighter touch with the confidence that the work's been done and that we've had the information we needed. I think where COVID's going to change it, obviously, if there's vaccines and needing certificates to show that that's there, I think it's going to push concepts like digital wallet, where it's anchored in identity, but it's more than just the identity that we're trying to assure as someone comes through. It's not just a visa permission to make sure that they can come in. It's knowing enough about the traveller so we can contact them if we need to in the case of outbreaks, or we can make risk-based decisions on where they've come from, and that there's not those additional risks being brought in that case. So I hope by sort of the middle of 2022, we're getting to a point where there's been a bit of rallying around concepts such as ICAO's digital travel credential, IATA's One ID concepts, and we're starting to see good trials proving those concepts and seeing the policy changes come in, that we can actually get some runs on the board with these seamless processes. I think the technology's jumped a lot in the last 5 years. It's obviously, 5-10 years ago, sending data packets of flight full of photos was almost prohibitive. Now it's a lot easier. That matching can be done. As Sung mentioned, if a cruise ship is taking photos of all those passengers, we should be able to do that while they're out at sea rather than having to wait for them to present at a border to do a lot of that work. So how do we move the border earlier? How do we make use of the technology in a way that's really smart? So I'd like to see the green shoots of not just recovery, but of adopting that future model that will take us to a more secure model, but also streamlined and give public confidence in travel again.
So one could argue that because of COVID, the rollout of additional EGates, expansion to just cope with increased traveller numbers in the short term, a lot of airports, borders will put on hold because the existing passenger numbers are being covered with the devices they've already deployed. And that will allow them to focus R&D on new technologies and new processes that might have taken 5 years to think about without COVID. Agree or disagree, guys? Son?
No, I agree with your statement that, you know, obviously the advancement of technology, the future is only just going to be brighter with the health aspect, the border security aspect. So I do agree with your point that obviously this is also private-public partnership as well too. So if all that gel with each of the parties, I do see the future is very bright for the travel and the border security.
Mohammed?
As I mentioned earlier, public-private partnership will bring these new technologies. They will be more service-oriented, where you are familiar with something like a Clear program or a Premium program, where they're offering these extra services. With the fee that they collect, they can justify the implementation of technology. Maybe there will be some extra fees applied to those tickets, so those technologies can be applied into the airports and the borders. I believe there will be a really hockey stick innovation curve for some of these contactless technologies by the summer of 2022.
And Don?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I think, it was a good point. And I think COVID's a bit of a pressure cooker, and out of that's going to come some innovation and I guess a willingness to look at how we do our business differently. So where some of those conversations might have taken a few years, they're probably been accelerated into a case of a couple of months now. And the norms and the way we've done things can be challenged in a way they probably wouldn't have been pre-COVID. So while it's been pretty devastating for the industry and a very difficult time for border agencies, health agencies, travellers and the like to deal with, I think there's some opportunities in terms of accelerating the recovery.
Well, I'd like to thank the panel, Sung and Don and Mohammed. I hope that this session has answered a lot of questions that you might have had, especially now you're not traveling. What are the airports thinking? What are the border agencies thinking? What are commercial technology thinking? You're not seeing what they're doing if you're not traveling. So this gives you a good idea of what things are in store for the future traveler from a seamless perspective and from a touchless perspective. So thank you very much, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.